3 years ago, my own children called me financially stupid and tried to force me into a retirement home because they thought I was broke and couldn't manage money. What they didn't know was that I had been secretly running a hedge fund that had generated over $3.2 million in profits. By the time I was done teaching them about real financial intelligence, they learned that underestimating your mother can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where this all began. My name is Victoria Blackwood, and for 35 years, I lived what most people would consider a perfect suburban life in Maplewood Heights, Connecticut. My husband Theodore was a respected cardiologist at Hartford General Hospital, and together we raised 3 children. Marcus, our eldest at 32, who worked as a corporate lawyer in Manhattan. Isabella, 29, a marketing executive for a pharmaceutical company, and Sebastian, 26, who had just finished his MBA and was working at a consulting firm in Boston. From the outside, we look like the American dream family. Beautiful colonial house on Elm Street with the white picket fence, 2 cars in the driveway, family vacations to Martha's Vineyard every summer. Theodore handled all our major financial decisions: the mortgage, investments, retirement planning, college funds. I was the supportive wife who managed the household, raised the children, and volunteered at the local library twice a week. But here's what nobody knew. While Theodore was making his steady doctor's salary, I had developed a passion that would change everything. It started innocently enough in 2018. Theodore was working longer hours at the hospital, the kids had all moved out, and I found myself with time on my hands for the first time in decades. Instead of joining a book club or taking up gardening like my neighbors, I became fascinated by the stock market. What began as casual curiosity about our family investments turned into something much deeper. I started reading financial newspapers, watching market analysis shows, and studying economic trends. Theodore would come home to find me surrounded by annual reports and market research, and he'd chuckle, "Victoria, darling, leave the money stuff to me. You focus on what you're good at." What Theodore didn't realize was that I had a natural gift for pattern recognition and risk assessment. While he saw numbers and charts, I saw stories about companies, industries, and economic cycles. I could sense when a stock was overvalued before the analysts caught on, and I had an uncanny ability to predict market corrections. In early 2019, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I opened a small trading account with $5,000 of money I had saved from my household budget over the years. I told Theodore it was for hobby investing, and he barely paid attention, assuming I'd lose it all and learn my lesson. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Within 6 months, I had turned that $5,000 into $12,000. By the end of 2019, it was $28,000. Theodore noticed the statements coming in the mail, but assumed they were just small gains from playing around with stocks. What he didn't know was that I wasn't just playing around. I was studying every trade, analyzing every win and loss, developing sophisticated strategies that most professional fund managers would envy. I was reading academic papers on behavioral finance, studying the methodologies of legendary investors like Warren Buffett and Peter Lynch, and developing my own unique approach to value investing combined with momentum trading. The real breakthrough came in early 2020, just before the pandemic hit. While everyone else was panicking about the market volatility, I saw opportunity. I had been tracking certain biotechnology companies and pharmaceutical stocks, and I realized that the market was about to dramatically shift toward healthcare and technology sectors. Using careful analysis and calculated risks, I made a series of strategic investments that would prove to be incredibly prescient. When the market crashed in March 2020, I was ready. While others were selling in panic, I was buying undervalued assets that I knew would recover stronger than ever. By December 2020, my hobby account had grown to $180,000. But I wasn't satisfied with just personal trading success. I had developed a systematic approach that I believed could work on a larger scale. That's when I made the decision that would transform me from a suburban housewife into a successful hedge fund manager. In January 2021, I quietly registered Meridian Capital Management LLC, a small hedge fund operating out of a rented office space in downtown Hartford. I invested $200,000 of my own money as the initial capital and began implementing the strategies I had been perfecting for 2 years. I told Theodore it was a small business venture, helping friends with their investments. He was so busy with his medical practice that he never asked for details, and I never volunteered them. As far as he knew, I was making a little spending money helping elderly neighbors understand their retirement accounts. The truth was far more impressive. By carefully selecting undervalued small-cap stocks, timing sector rotations, and using sophisticated hedging strategies to minimize risk, Meridian Capital Management was generating returns that caught the attention of institutional investors. Within 18 months, I had attracted $800,000 in outside investment capital from wealthy individuals who had heard about my track record through word of mouth. My fund was averaging annual returns of 24%, significantly outperforming the S&P 500 and most major hedge funds. But I kept this success completely secret from my family. I maintained the same modest lifestyle, drove the same Honda Accord, shopped at the same grocery stores. The only difference was the growing balance in my business accounts, which I monitored daily from my home office, that Theodore thought was just my computer room. My children had no idea that their financially naive mother was actually outperforming Wall Street professionals. When they visited for holidays, they saw the same woman who had always managed the household budget and clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. Marcus would often make jokes about how I didn't understand investments and would suggest that Theodore needed to, quote, keep a closer eye on mom's spending. Isabella would roll her eyes when I asked questions about their careers, assuming I couldn't possibly understand the complexities of corporate finance. Sebastian, fresh out of business school, would lecture me about basic economic principles as if I were a child learning to count. They saw what they expected to see: a traditional wife and mother who had never worked outside the home, who didn't have a college degree in business or finance, who couldn't possibly understand the sophisticated world of investments and wealth management. Little did they know that within 2 years, their financially stupid mother would be managing a portfolio worth millions of dollars, and their own financial mistakes would force them to come crawling back to the woman they had consistently underestimated. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story isn't just about financial success. It's about respect, family dynamics, and what happens when children forget that their parents might have hidden depths they never bothered to discover. The real test of our family's true nature was about to begin, and it would change everything forever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The beginning of the end started with what seemed like a routine phone call on a Tuesday morning in September 2022. I was in my home office, analyzing quarterly earnings reports for 3 biotech companies I was considering for the fund, when my phone rang. It was Marcus, and his voice carried that particular tone he used when he was about to ask for something significant. "Mom, I need to talk to you about Dad's medical situation," he said, cutting straight to business as always. "The doctors are recommending he reduce his patient load significantly. The stress from the hospital is affecting his recovery from the heart episode last month." Theodore had indeed had a minor cardiac event, ironic for a cardiologist, but not uncommon given the stress of his profession. What Marcus didn't mention was that Theodore's reduced schedule would also mean a substantial reduction in our household income, dropping from his usual $280,000 annually to probably around $120,000. "Of course," I replied, minimizing the spreadsheet on my screen. "His health comes first. We'll manage whatever adjustments we need to make." "That's just it, Mom," Marcus continued, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Isabella, Sebastian, and I have been talking, and we're worried about how you and Dad will handle the financial transition. We know Dad's always managed the money, and with his reduced capacity, there it was, the assumption that had defined my relationship with my children for decades, that I was financially helpless without Theodore's guidance." "We've come up with a solution," Marcus pressed on. "You know how Dad's always talked about downsizing eventually? Well, we think now might be the perfect time. The house is worth about $850,000 in today's market, and it's really too big for just the two of you anyway." I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. "Marcus, your father and I haven't discussed selling the house. This is our home. We raised you children here." "Mom, be practical," he said, using that patronizing tone that made my teeth clench. "The property taxes alone are $18,000 a year. The maintenance costs are only going to increase. Dad's retirement savings aren't going to stretch as far as they used to, especially with healthcare costs." What Marcus didn't know was that I had been discreetly monitoring our family's financial situation for months. Theodore's 401k had taken a hit during the market volatility, dropping from $1.2 million to about $890,000. His pension would provide decent income, but Marcus was right about one thing. The combination of reduced work income and increased medical expenses would create a tighter budget. But what none of them knew was that my hedge fund was currently managing $2.4 million in assets, with my personal stake worth approximately $800,000. I could easily cover any shortfall in our household expenses without anyone noticing. Isabella found a beautiful senior living community in Westfield, Marcus continued enthusiastically. Sunset Manor Estates. It's got everything: golf course, community center, medical facilities on site. The buy-in is only $320,000 for a 2-bedroom unit, and the monthly fees are very reasonable. Marcus, I interrupted, I appreciate your concern, but… Mom, let me finish. Here's the really smart part. After you sell the house and buy into Sunset Manor, there would be about $500,000 left over. We've researched some excellent investment opportunities that could provide you with additional income. My antennae went up immediately. What kind of investment opportunities? Well, Sebastian's been working with this consulting firm that specializes in helping families optimize their retirement investments. They've identified some really solid options: corporate bonds, dividend-focused mutual funds, some conservative real estate investment trusts. I almost laughed out loud. Sebastian, with his fresh MBA and zero real-world investment experience, was going to teach me about portfolio management. And Isabella has a connection through her pharmaceutical company with a financial advisor who specializes in medical professionals' retirement planning. She could help you set up a proper asset allocation strategy. What about Theodore? I asked. Have you discussed this with your father? Dad's got enough to worry about with his health right now. We thought it would be better if you presented this as a unified family decision. You know how he is. He'll just worry about the details instead of focusing on his recovery. There it was. My own children were asking me to manipulate my husband into selling our family home, based on their assumption that I couldn't handle our finances independently. Marcus, I need time to think about this, I said carefully. Of course. But Mom, don't take too long. The real estate market is really favorable right now for sellers. But that could change. And the senior community Isabella found? There's a waiting list. If we don't move quickly, you might miss this opportunity. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring at my computer screen, where the Meridian Capital Management dashboard showed our fund's year-to-date performance, up 31.7%, significantly outperforming every investment option my children had mentioned. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Here were my 3 children, a lawyer, a marketing executive, and an MBA, trying to convince me to make financial decisions that would actually hurt our family's wealth, while I was sitting on investment strategies that had consistently outperformed the market for 3 years. But what bothered me most wasn't their financial ignorance. It was their complete lack of faith in my capabilities. Not once had any of them asked if I had thoughts about our financial situation. Not once had they inquired whether I might have insights or solutions they hadn't considered. That evening, when Theodore came home from his reduced hospital schedule, he looked tired but relieved. The lighter patient load is already helping, he said, settling into his favorite chair in the living room. I think the kids were right to worry about my stress levels. Speaking of the kids, I said carefully, Marcus called today with a suggestion about our living situation. I outlined their proposal, watching Theodore's expression shift from interest to concern to mild frustration. They want us to sell the house? He asked. Victoria, I know our income is going to be reduced, but we're not destitute. My pension kicks in fully next year, and we have the 401k. We can manage the house expenses. I know, I said, but they seem genuinely worried about our financial security, Theodore sighed. The kids mean well, but sometimes I think they forget we managed our finances perfectly well before they were born and during the 18 years we supported them. What he didn't say, but what I heard clearly, was that even Theodore assumed he had been the one managing our finances perfectly well. The idea that I might have been contributing to our financial stability in ways he didn't know about never crossed his mind. Over the next few days, the pressure from my children intensified. Isabella called with detailed information about Sunset Manor, including glossy brochures and testimonials from satisfied residents. Sebastian sent me articles about smart retirement downsizing strategies and maximizing your nest egg in uncertain economic times. The turning point came when all 3 of them showed up at our house the following Saturday for what they called a quote, family financial planning meeting. They had prepared a presentation. An actual PowerPoint presentation, complete with charts showing property tax trends, healthcare cost projections, and investment return scenarios. They had calculated everything except the one variable they didn't know existed: their mother's secret financial success. Mom, Dad, Marcus began, setting up his laptop on our dining room table. We want to walk you through some numbers that we think will help you make the best decision for your future. As I watched my children earnestly explaining basic financial concepts to me, concepts I had been applying professionally for years, I realized something profound was happening. This wasn't just about a house or retirement planning. This was about respect, trust, and whether my own family saw me as a capable adult or as someone who needed to be managed and protected from her own financial incompetence. The bottom line, Sebastian concluded after 20 minutes of charts and graphs, is that this move would provide you with financial security and peace of mind. You wouldn't have to worry about money anymore. We just want to take care of you, Isabella added gently, the way you took care of us when we were growing up. The role reversal was complete. My children now saw themselves as the financially responsible adults who needed to guide their naive parents through complex decisions. What they didn't realize was that they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating people, especially the woman who had raised them to be smart, successful adults. But first, I had a decision to make. Continue protecting their illusions or begin the process that would eventually shatter everything they thought they knew about their financially stupid mother. What started as occasional family meetings soon became a relentless campaign of financial intervention. My children had apparently decided that Theodore and I were incapable of making rational decisions about our own future, and they weren't going to take no for an answer. The PowerPoint presentation was just the beginning. Within a week of that Saturday meeting, Isabella had scheduled a tour of Sunset Manor Estates without asking our permission. It's just a courtesy visit, she explained when she called to inform us. The director, Mrs. Pemberton, is expecting us Tuesday at 2 p.m. I already confirmed you and Dad are available. Isabella, we didn't agree to any tour, I protested. Mom, you said you needed time to think about it. How can you think about it properly without seeing the place? It's just an hour of your time. What's the harm in looking? The harm, I realized, was that each small concession was being used to justify the next level of pressure. But Theodore, ever the peacemaker, agreed to go. One tour won't hurt, he said. Maybe it will help us give the kids a more informed response. Sunset Manor Estates was exactly what I expected. A well-maintained facility designed to make aging feel like an upgrade rather than a defeat. Mrs. Pemberton, a cheerful woman in her 50s, led us through immaculate hallways lined with generic artwork, past a library that looked like a hotel lobby, and into a 2-bedroom unit that felt like an upscale hotel suite. As you can see, Mrs. Pemberton explained, we've designed these spaces to maximize both comfort and safety. No stairs to worry about, emergency call systems in every room, and of course, all exterior maintenance is handled by our staff. Isabella was practically glowing. Isn't it perfect, Mom? Look at this kitchen. It's so much easier to manage than your big one at home, and the community activities. They have bridge tournaments, book clubs, even investment seminars. Investment seminars? If only she knew that the woman she was trying to convince to attend beginner investment seminars was currently outperforming most of the fund managers on Wall Street. This social aspect is really wonderful, Mrs. Pemberton continued. Many of our residents say they wish they'd made the move sooner. No more worrying about home maintenance, lawn care, or managing finances independently. There it was again. The assumption that managing finances independently was a burden to be avoided rather than a skill to be maintained. Theodore asked practical questions about medical facilities and emergency procedures. I asked about the waiting list and cancellation policies, which seemed to surprise Isabella. Perhaps she hadn't expected me to think strategically about the logistics of a decision I hadn't agreed to make. As we drove home, Theodore was quiet, and I could see him genuinely considering the option. It wouldn't be the worst thing, he mused. Less responsibility, more time to focus on my health and recovery. That evening, Marcus called to follow up on the tour. When I mentioned that we were still undecided, his tone shifted from enthusiastic to concerned. Mom, I need to be frank with you about something. Isabella and I were reviewing Dad's financial statements, just trying to help with the planning, and we're more worried than we initially let on. My stomach tightened. What do you mean, reviewing his financial statements? Dad gave us permission to look at the 401k and investment accounts. Mom, the numbers aren't great. Between the market losses and Dad's reduced income, you're looking at a significant lifestyle adjustment, even if you stay in the house. I felt a surge of anger that surprised me with its intensity. Theodore had shared our private financial information with our children without discussing it with me first. More importantly, Marcus was presenting their analysis as fact when I knew they were working with incomplete information. We think you should meet with Isabella's financial advisor, Marcus continued. Patricia Chen from Meridian Financial. No relation to the investment company, different Meridian. She specializes in retirement transitions. She could really help you understand your options. The irony was almost too much to bear. My son wanted me to get financial advice from someone whose firm probably couldn't match the returns I was generating in my sleep. Marcus, I appreciate your concern, but your father and I are perfectly capable of. Mom, please don't take this the wrong way, but you've never had to make these kinds of financial decisions on your own. Dad's always handled the big picture stuff. With his health situation, you need professional guidance. Never had to make financial decisions on my own. If he only knew that I had been making financial decisions that affected not just our family but several other wealthy families who trusted me with their life savings. The pressure campaign escalated over the following weeks. Sebastian sent me articles about the hidden costs of aging in place and why smart retirees downsize early. Isabella forwarded testimonials from Sunset Manor residents about how much happier they were after making the move. But the most insidious part was how they began involving Theodore in their narrative. During family dinners, they would casually mention how much easier his life would be without the stress of home maintenance. They'd bring up stories about other doctors who had suffered heart attacks from trying to manage too much in retirement. Dr. Peterson from the cardiology department had to sell his house after his second heart attack, Isabella mentioned during Sunday dinner. His wife said she wished they'd moved to a senior community sooner. The stress of maintaining that big house was just too much. Theodore would nod thoughtfully, and I could see my children's arguments slowly wearing down his resistance. The financial advisor meeting was scheduled whether I wanted it or not. Patricia is doing this as a favor to me, Isabella explained. She normally has a 6-month waiting list for new clients, but she's agreed to see you and Dad next Friday at 10 a.m. Isabella, we haven't agreed to meet with anyone. Mom, it's a consultation. She's not going to make you sign anything. She just wants to review your situation and give you an objective professional opinion. Objective professional opinion. From someone who had never generated the returns I was achieving, about financial strategies I had already mastered. The meeting was held at Patricia Chen's office in downtown Hartford, a sleek space designed to project competence and trustworthiness. Patricia herself was exactly what I expected. Mid-40s, expensively dressed, with the confident demeanor of someone who believed her credentials spoke for themselves. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, she began, spreading our financial documents across her conference table. Isabella has briefed me on your situation, and I think we can develop some excellent strategies to optimize your retirement security. She spent 45 minutes explaining concepts I had been applying successfully for years: asset allocation, risk tolerance, diversification strategies. Her recommended portfolio was exactly the kind of conservative approach that would generate steady 6 to 8% returns, while my hedge fund was averaging over 25%. The key, Patricia concluded, is to simplify your financial life so you don't have to worry about making complex investment decisions. We can set up a balanced portfolio that requires minimal oversight. Minimal oversight. As if careful analysis and active management were problems to be avoided rather than the keys to superior performance. Theodore asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely impressed with Patricia's presentation. When she recommended liquidating our current investments to implement her optimized strategy, he nodded as if this made perfect sense. What about the house? Isabella asked. We've been discussing whether downsizing might be beneficial. Absolutely, Patricia agreed immediately. Real estate represents a significant portion of your current assets, but it's not generating income. Converting that equity into income-producing investments could substantially improve your cash flow. I watched this performance with growing frustration. Here was a financial advisor recommending that we liquidate assets and reduce our investment sophistication, while my children nodded approvingly at advice that would actually make us poorer. But the most maddening part was realizing that my family genuinely believed they were helping me. In their minds, they were protecting their financially naive mother from making mistakes she wasn't qualified to avoid. The meeting ended with Patricia providing a detailed proposal for managing our finances, Isabella scheduling a second tour of Sunset Manor, and Sebastian volunteering to research moving companies just to have the information ready. As we drove home, Theodore was quiet for several minutes before finally speaking. Maybe the kids are right, Victoria. This is all getting pretty complex, and with my reduced capacity. Theodore, do you really want to sell our home? He sighed deeply. I want to make sure we're making smart decisions. And honestly, having the kids take such an active interest in our welfare, it feels good to know they care that much. That night, lying in bed next to my husband of 36 years, I realized that my children had successfully created a narrative where their intervention was evidence of love, their control was evidence of care, and my resistance was evidence of confusion. They had gradually shifted the dynamic so that every decision required their approval, Every financial choice needed their guidance, and every expression of independence was treated as a potential mistake that required correction. Meanwhile, upstairs in my home office, my computer showed that Meridian Capital Management had just closed the best quarter in the fund's history, generating returns that would make any financial advisor jealous. The trap was closing around me, built for my children's love, their assumptions, and their complete inability to imagine that their mother might be more financially sophisticated than any of them had ever bothered to discover. I realized the depth of my situation during a family dinner in early November, when my children finally dropped all pretense of asking for my opinion and simply began making decisions for me. "We've put down a deposit at Sunset Manor," Isabella announced over dessert, as casually as if she were mentioning the weather. "Mrs. Pemberton called this morning. There's been a cancellation, and a 2-bedroom unit is available immediately. If we don't act now, the next opening might not be for 8 months. I set down my fork carefully, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that had become my constant companion during family gatherings. "You put down a deposit without discussing it with us?" "It's fully refundable," Marcus added quickly, pulling out his phone to show me the receipt. $5,000 to hold the unit for 30 days. "Mom, this is exactly what we've been talking about. The timing is perfect." "Perfect for whom?" I asked, but Theodore was already leaning over to look at Marcus's phone. "The unit they're holding is actually nicer than the one we toured," Sebastian chimed in, spreading photos across the dining table. "Corner location, better view of the gardens, and it's already been updated with the newer safety features." I stared at the photos of rooms I had never seen, in a building I had visited once under pressure, for a move I had never agreed to make. My children were planning my life with the same efficiency they brought to their professional projects, and with about as much consideration for my actual preferences. "There's more," Isabella continued, her voice taking on that excited tone she used when she thought she was delivering good news. "Patricia Chen has reviewed our proposal for managing the proceeds from the house sale, and she thinks we can generate even better returns than she initially projected. She's identified some municipal bonds that are perfect for your risk profile. Municipal bonds yielding maybe 4% annually, when my hedge fund had just closed a position in renewable energy stocks that generated a 47% return in 6 months. But I couldn't say that. I couldn't explain that Patricia Chen's perfect portfolio was a financial disaster compared to what I was already achieving. "And here's the really exciting part," Marcus said, clearly proud of their coordination. "We've already spoken with a real estate agent about listing the house. Brenda Martinez from Coldwell Banker thinks we could get $875,000, maybe even $900, if we stage it properly." "You contacted a real estate agent?" Theodore asked, and for the first time, I heard uncertainty in his voice. "Just for a preliminary assessment," Sebastian assured him. "Dad, we know this feels sudden, but the market conditions are really favorable right now. Interest rates are still reasonable, and there's strong demand for houses in this neighborhood. If we wait until spring, we might miss this opportunity." "What about our things?" I asked quietly. 36 years of memories, Theodore's study, the garden I've been cultivating for decades. "Mom, that's the beauty of downsizing," Isabella said gently, as if explaining something to a child. "You keep what matters most, and let go of the rest." It's actually very liberating. Patricia knows an estate sale company that specializes in helping families transition. They handle everything, an estate sale. They were talking about liquidating my life as if I were already dead. "Besides," Marcus added, "you'll have so much less to worry about. No more property taxes, no more maintenance calls, no more yard work. You can focus on enjoying your retirement instead of managing a house that's really too big for your needs anyway." The conversation continued around me as my children discussed timelines, logistics, and implementation strategies. They had transformed from my offspring into a corporate consulting team, and I was their client, or perhaps more accurately, their project. Theodore asked questions about the timeline and seemed genuinely interested in the financial projections Patricia had prepared. "If we could net $700,000 from the house sale, after realtor fees and closing costs," he mused, "and that generates steady income through Patricia's investment strategy." "Exactly," Sebastian interrupted. "You'd have your pension, Social Security, the investment income, and no major housing expenses. You'd actually be more financially secure than you are now. More financially secure." If only they knew that I was currently sitting on unrealized gains that exceeded Theodore's entire 401k balance. But what disturbed me most wasn't their financial ignorance. It was how seamlessly they had shifted from offering advice to making decisions. When had my opinion become irrelevant to choices about my own life? "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Of course," Isabella replied, but her tone suggested this was a mere formality. But Mom, we really can't wait too long. The deposit at Sunset Manor is only good for 30 days. And if we're going to list the house, we should do it before the holidays. January and February are terrible months for real estate sales. After my children left that evening, Theodore and I sat in our living room, the same room where I had rocked each of my babies, where we had celebrated countless Christmas mornings, where Theodore had proposed 37 years ago. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken concerns. "Victoria," Theodore said finally, "I know this feels overwhelming, but maybe the kids have a point. Maybe we are being stubborn about holding on to things we don't really need anymore. Do you want to move, Theodore?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I want to make sure we're not making decisions based on emotion instead of logic. And honestly, having the kids so involved and supportive, it makes me feel like we're not facing this alone." That was the heart of it. Theodore saw our children's intervention as support, while I experienced it as suffocation. He interpreted their financial management as caring, while I recognized it as control. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified in ways that felt increasingly manipulative. Isabella sent me articles about seniors who had waited too long to downsize and ended up making moves under crisis conditions. Sebastian forwarded stories about retirees who had successfully transitioned to senior communities and described how much happier they were. Marcus called every other day with updates about market conditions, interest rate projections, and seasonal trends in real estate. "Mom, I just want to make sure you have all the information you need to make an informed decision," he would say, before proceeding to explain why any decision other than immediate action would be financially irresponsible. But the most insidious part was how they had begun to frame my reluctance as a character flaw. During phone conversations, I heard phrases like, "Mom's having trouble letting go," and "It's natural for seniors to resist change," and "We need to be patient with her adjustment process." They were pathologizing my resistance to their plan, treating my preference for independence as a symptom of aging rather than a legitimate choice made by a competent adult. The breaking point came when Isabella showed up at our house on a Saturday morning with a woman I didn't recognize. "Mom, this is Jennifer Walsh from Organized Transitions," Isabella announced. "She specializes in helping families prepare for downsizing moves. I thought it would be helpful for her to do a preliminary assessment of what would need to be addressed." Jennifer Walsh began walking through my house, making notes about furniture, artwork, and personal belongings, as if she were conducting an inventory for an estate auction. She measured rooms, photographed items, and asked questions about sentimental attachments and family heirlooms. "The key to a successful transition," Jennifer explained, "is starting the sorting process early. We typically recommend 3 categories: keep, donate, and sell. The goal is to help families make rational decisions about possessions instead of emotional ones. Rational versus emotional decisions. About my own belongings, in my own home." I watched this stranger evaluate my life's accumulations while my daughter nodded approvingly, and I realized that somewhere along the way, I had lost control of my own story. My children had decided what was best for me, and they were systematically removing my ability to choose differently. That night, I sat in my home office looking at the Meridian Capital Management performance reports. Year-to-date returns, 34.2%. Assets under management, $2.8 million. Personal net worth, approximately $950,000. I was probably wealthier than any of my children, certainly more financially sophisticated than the advisors they had hired to manage my money, and demonstrably more successful at investment management than anyone involved in their intervention. Yet they saw me as a confused old woman who needed protection from her own poor judgment. The cruel irony was that if I revealed my financial success, it would solve the immediate problem but create a bigger one. How could I explain that I had been secretly managing a hedge fund for 3 years without appearing deceptive? How could I justify hiding such significant assets from my own husband? But more importantly, I was beginning to realize that this wasn't really about money at all. This was about respect, autonomy, and whether my own family saw me as a capable adult or as a burden to be managed.
The answer was becoming painfully clear, and it was about to change everything. The moment that changed everything happened on a cold December morning when I received a phone call that my children would never see coming. "Mrs. Blackwood, this is David Rothschild from Pinnacle Institutional Investments." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and carried the kind of authority that commanded attention. "I'm calling regarding Meridian Capital Management. We've been tracking your fund's performance for the past 18 months, and frankly, we're impressed. I was in my home office, ostensibly organizing family photos for the move my children had now scheduled for February, but actually reviewing portfolio allocations for the fourth quarter. Theodore was at a doctor's appointment, and the house was quiet except for the gentle hum of my computer and the distant sound of Jennifer Walsh's transition team cataloging our belongings in the basement. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rothschild, but I'm not sure what you're referring to," I said carefully. After 3 years of running the fund in complete secrecy, I had become instinctively cautious about unexpected inquiries. "Mrs. Blackwood, let me be direct. Meridian Capital Management has generated 34% returns in a market where most hedge funds are struggling to break even. Your tech sector predictions in early 2021 were remarkably prescient. Your energy transition strategy last quarter outperformed Goldman Sachs's energy fund, and your risk management during the September volatility was textbook perfect." My heart started beating faster. Pinnacle Institutional Investments managed pension funds and endowments for major universities and corporations. They had over $12 billion in assets under management. If they were calling me, it meant my little secret fund had caught the attention of the institutional investment world. "Mr. Rothschild, I appreciate your interest, but Meridian Capital Management is a small operation. I'm not sure we would be a good fit for institutional investment." "That's exactly why we're interested," he continued. "Mrs. Blackwood, we represent several pension funds and university endowments that are specifically looking for exceptional smaller managers. Your size allows you the agility that larger funds can't maintain, and your track record suggests you have insights that the market hasn't fully recognized yet." He paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "We would like to invest $50 million with Meridian Capital Management, with the possibility of increasing that to $100 million based on continued performance. Our due diligence team has reviewed your regulatory filings, your investment strategies, and your operational procedures. Everything checks out perfectly. $50 million. I nearly dropped the phone. "Mr. Rothschild, that's a very substantial investment. I would need time to consider whether we have the capacity to manage assets of that scale." "Of course. But Mrs. Blackwood, I want you to understand what this represents. Based on our projections, if you maintain your current performance levels, a $50 million investment with your fund could generate returns that would place you among the top 5% of hedge fund managers in the country. We're not just talking about money. We're talking about recognition as one of the premier investment managers in New England." After I hung up, I sat in my office chair staring out the window at the garden I had spent 15 years cultivating, the garden my children wanted me to abandon because they assumed I couldn't handle the complexity of home maintenance. $50 million in new investment capital. Recognition as a premier fund manager. Validation from the institutional investment community that my strategies were not just successful, but exceptional. And downstairs, a team of strangers was cataloging my possessions for an estate sale, while my children planned to move me into a senior community where I could attend beginner investment seminars. The irony was so profound it was almost funny. Almost.
I spent the rest of that day researching Pinnacle Institutional Investments. They weren't just legitimate, they were prestigious. Their client list included the Teachers' Pension Fund for Connecticut, the Endowment for Yale University, and the retirement system for several Fortune 500 companies. More importantly, I researched their due diligence process. When Pinnacle evaluated a fund manager, they didn't just look at returns. They analyzed investment philosophy, risk management protocols, operational procedures, and professional competence. Their call meant that I had passed every test that the institutional investment world considered important. That evening, as Theodore and I sat down for dinner, he seemed unusually thoughtful. "Victoria, I had an interesting conversation with Dr. Matthews today during my appointment," he said, cutting his chicken methodically. "He mentioned that his brother-in-law works for some big investment company in New York, and apparently they've been tracking some small hedge fund manager in Connecticut who's been generating incredible returns." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "Really?" "Yeah," he said, "this manager, some woman running a fund called Meridian something, has been outperforming Wall Street firms with billions in assets." Matthew said his brother-in-law called her, quote, "the best-kept secret in Connecticut finance." I managed to keep my voice steady. "That's interesting. It made me think about our situation," Theodore continued. "Here we are, worried about our financial security, talking about downsizing and simplifying our investments, And meanwhile, there are people right here in Connecticut who are generating the kind of returns that could solve all our concerns. What do you mean? Theodore set down his fork and looked at me directly. Victoria, what if we're approaching this all wrong? What if instead of accepting lower returns and reducing our investment sophistication, we should be looking for better management? What if the kids' advice, well-intentioned as it is actually too conservative? This was the moment I had been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. Theodore was beginning to question our children's financial guidance, but he was doing it without knowing that the solution he was describing was literally sitting across the dinner table from him. Theodore, the children seem very confident about Patricia Chen's recommendations. I know, and Patricia seems very competent. But Victoria, 34% returns versus 6% returns. That's the difference between financial stress and financial freedom. Maybe we should be taking more risks, not fewer. Over the next few days, I found myself in an impossible situation. Pinnacle Institutional Investments had given me until the end of December to respond to their offer. Accepting would mean managing $50 million in additional assets, which would require more sophisticated operations, potentially hiring staff, and definitely higher visibility in the financial community. But more importantly, it would mean revealing my secret to Theodore and eventually to my children. There would be no way to explain suddenly managing $50 million in institutional money without admitting that I had been running a successful hedge fund for 3 years. Meanwhile, my children's timeline was accelerating. Isabella had scheduled the final walkthrough at Sunset Manor for December 20th. Marcus had arranged for the real estate listing to go live on January 2nd. Sebastian had coordinated with Jennifer Walsh to begin the estate sale process immediately after New Year's. They had created a momentum that assumed my compliance. And every day that passed made it harder to change course without appearing irrational or difficult. But the Pinnacle opportunity had changed something fundamental in my thinking. For 3 years, I had been content to run my small, secret fund, generating excellent returns while maintaining my cover as a traditional housewife. I had convinced myself that I was protecting my family by not burdening them with knowledge of my financial activities. Now I realized that my secrecy wasn't protecting anyone. It was enabling my children to make terrible decisions based on incomplete information, while preventing Theodore from understanding our actual financial position. More importantly, I was beginning to understand that my success wasn't just personal achievement, it was professional validation. Pinnacle Institutional Investments wasn't interested in Victoria Blackwood, the housewife who played with stocks. They wanted to invest with Victoria Blackwood, the fund manager who had proven she could generate superior returns in any market condition. The question was whether I was ready to become that person publicly, and whether my family could handle the truth about who I really was. On December 18th, I received another call that forced my hand. "Mrs. Blackwood, this is Janet Morrison from Financial Weekly magazine," the caller announced. "We're doing a feature story on emerging hedge fund managers in New England, and Meridian Capital Management is at the top of our list. We understand you've been generating exceptional returns while maintaining a very low profile. We'd love to do an interview about your investment philosophy and background." Financial Weekly, a national publication read by everyone in the investment industry, including financial advisors like Patricia Chen. "Ms. Morrison, I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of publicity. Mrs. Blackwood, we've been tracking funds across New England for this story, and your performance metrics are remarkable. Our readers would be very interested in understanding how you've achieved such consistent outperformance. Plus, we understand that Pinnacle Institutional is considering a significant investment in your fund. That kind of institutional validation would make for a compelling story." After I hung up, I realized that my secret was about to become public, whether I wanted it to or not. Pinnacle's interest meant that other institutional investors would start paying attention. Financial Weekly's article would put my name and track record in front of thousands of investment professionals. Within weeks, everyone in Connecticut's financial community would know that Victoria Blackwood of Maplewood Heights was one of the state's most successful hedge fund managers, including my children, who at that very moment were planning my move to a senior community because they believed I was too financially incompetent to manage my own retirement. The time for secrets was over. The question now was how to use this revelation strategically and whether I was ready for the war that was about to begin. The opportunity to test my family's true nature came sooner than expected, and in a way I never could have planned. On December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas, I received an urgent call from my fund's prime broker about a major market opportunity that required immediate action. A pharmaceutical company called BioNova Therapeutics had just announced preliminary results from their Alzheimer's drug trial that were significantly better than expected, but the market hadn't fully recognized the implications yet. "Mrs. Blackwood," my broker explained, "the stock jumped 12% on the news, But our analysis suggests this is just the beginning. If their phase 3 trials confirm these results, we're looking at a potential breakthrough treatment. The market cap could triple within 6 months. I had been tracking BioNova for 8 months, ever since I noticed unusual insider trading patterns and increased research and development spending. The company fit perfectly into my biotechnology investment thesis, and I had been waiting for exactly this kind of catalyst. But the opportunity required a substantial capital commitment, more than I could make with my current fund size. Unless I accepted Pinnacle's $50 million investment immediately, I need to make a decision today, I told Theodore that evening. There's a significant investment opportunity, but it requires moving faster than I originally planned. Theodore looked up from his medical journal, confused. Investment opportunity? Victoria, what are you talking about? We're supposed to be simplifying our finances, not making major investment decisions. This was it. The moment when I would either continue living the lie or finally tell my husband the truth about who I had become over the past 3 years. Theodore, I need to tell you something important. Something I should have told you years ago. I led him to my home office and opened my laptop, navigating to the Meridian Capital Management dashboard. Theodore stood behind my chair as I pulled up the performance reports, the asset allocation charts, and the client statements. Theodore, for the past 3 years, I've been running a hedge fund. A successful hedge fund. These are the returns I've generated. These are the assets I manage. And this is the income I've been earning. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Theodore stared at the screen, his eyes moving from number to number, trying to process what he was seeing. Victoria, this shows assets under management of almost $3 million. This says your personal investment is worth nearly $1 million. This can't be real. It's real, Theodore. Every number, every transaction, every return. I've been managing money professionally, while our children have been explaining basic financial concepts to me like I'm a child. Theodore sat down heavily in the chair beside my desk. You've been running a hedge fund? From our house? For 3 years? Victoria, how is this possible? How did you? I walked him through the entire story. From my initial curiosity about the stock market, to my first successful trades, to building Meridian Capital Management into a fund that had caught the attention of major institutional investors. The pharmaceutical opportunity I mentioned? Pinnacle Institutional Investments wants to invest $50 million with my fund specifically to pursue these kinds of opportunities. They called me one of the premier investment managers in New England. Theodore stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our backyard. Victoria, this is incredible. But why didn't you tell me? 3 years, Victoria. 3 years of keeping this secret. Because I knew what would happen. I knew you would worry about the risks, question whether I was qualified, wonder if I was making mistakes we couldn't afford. And honestly, because I wanted to prove to myself that I could do this before I had to defend it to anyone else. But the children, they've been treating you like you don't understand money. They've been planning to manage our finances because they think you can't handle complex decisions. I know, and I've been letting them, because I couldn't figure out how to reveal this without looking deceptive. Theodore was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what I had told him. Finally, he turned back to me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of admiration, confusion, and something that might have been respect. Victoria, what you've accomplished is remarkable. But what do we do now? The children have already put down deposits, made commitments. They think they're helping us. That's when I told him about my plan. Theodore, what if we gave them a chance to show us who they really are? What if we presented them with information that challenges their assumptions and see how they respond? What do you mean? What if I told them I've been offered an investment opportunity, a chance to partner with someone who could potentially solve all our financial concerns? What if I asked for their advice about whether we should take a risk on something that could change our situation completely? Theodore looked skeptical. Victoria, they're going to tell you it's too risky, too complicated, too good to be true. They've already decided what's best for us. Exactly. And that will tell us everything we need to know about whether they see me as a capable adult or as someone who needs to be protected from her own judgment. But what about the hedge fund? What about this pharmaceutical investment? I'm going to make that decision based on what's best for our future, not based on what our children think I'm capable of understanding. The next morning was December 23rd, and all 3 children were coming for Christmas Eve dinner. It would be the perfect opportunity to conduct my test. I spent the morning preparing what I privately called the proposal. I created a simplified version of the BioNova opportunity, removing any references to Meridian Capital Management but presenting the essential facts: a pharmaceutical company with breakthrough potential, an opportunity to invest a significant portion of our assets for potentially extraordinary returns, and a tight timeline that required immediate action. When Marcus, Isabella, and Sebastian arrived that afternoon, I asked them to join Theodore and me in the living room for a family discussion. "I wanted to talk to you all about something before tomorrow's celebration," I began. "Theodore and I have been thinking about our financial situation, and we've been presented with an opportunity that could change everything." I could see the immediate concern on their faces. An opportunity that could change everything was exactly the kind of dangerous thinking they had been trying to eliminate from our decision-making process. "What kind of opportunity, Mom?" Marcus asked carefully. "A friend of Theodore's from the medical community has told us about an investment opportunity, a pharmaceutical company that's developing a treatment for Alzheimer's disease. The preliminary results are extraordinarily promising, and there's an opportunity to invest before the market fully recognizes the potential." Isabella and Sebastian exchanged glances. "Mom, that sounds like speculation, not investment," Isabella said gently. "The potential returns could be substantial," I continued. "Enough to make all our concerns about downsizing irrelevant. We could afford to keep the house, maintain our current lifestyle, and have significant additional security." "How substantial?" Sebastian asked, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice. "If the treatment succeeds in trials, the investment could potentially triple or quadruple in value within a year." The reaction was immediate and exactly what I had expected. "Mom, that's not an investment opportunity, that's gambling," Marcus said firmly. "Those kinds of returns are only possible with enormous risks." "Pharmaceutical companies fail clinical trials all the time," Isabella added. "You could lose everything." "Mom, this is exactly why we've been encouraging you to work with Patricia Chen," Sebastian said. "She would never recommend something this speculative. This sounds like the kind of scheme that targets seniors who don't understand the risks." There it was. Their assumption that I was a potential victim who needed protection from my own poor judgment. "What if it's not speculation?" I asked. "What if the person recommending this has a track record of successful pharmaceutical investments? What if they've generated consistent returns over several years?" "Mom, even if that's true, past performance doesn't guarantee future results," Marcus replied, as if he were explaining this concept to me for the first time. "The smartest thing you can do at your age is avoid unnecessary risks." "But what if the potential rewards justify the risk? What if this could solve all our financial concerns?" "Mom, you're thinking emotionally instead of rationally," Isabella said, using the same tone she probably used with difficult clients at her pharmaceutical company. "This is exactly why people make bad financial decisions. They focus on the potential rewards instead of the potential losses." I looked at Theodore, who was watching our children with an expression of growing disappointment. "So you're all recommending that I pass on this opportunity?" I asked. "Absolutely," they said in unison. "Even though it could potentially provide financial security that would make all our current concerns irrelevant?" "Mom, that's magical thinking," Sebastian said. "The only way to build real financial security is through consistent conservative investments over time, not through get-rich-quick schemes." I nodded slowly. "I understand. Thank you all for your advice." After they left that evening to spend Christmas Eve with their respective partners, Theodore and I sat in our living room, surrounded by boxes, packed for our move to Sunset Manor. "They didn't even ask for details," Theodore said quietly. "They didn't want to know who is making the recommendation, what the company does, what the science looks like. They just assumed you couldn't possibly understand something they hadn't already approved." "Now you know why I kept the hedge fund secret," I replied. "They don't see me as someone capable of making sophisticated decisions. They see me as someone who needs to be protected from opportunities they don't understand." Theodore looked around our living room, taking in the packed boxes and the life we were supposedly preparing to abandon. "Victoria, what if we didn't move? What if we told the children we've changed our minds? Then they would assume we're being irrational and emotional. They would increase the pressure, bring in more professionals, maybe even suggest we're not competent to make our own decisions. And what if you revealed the hedge fund? Then they would spend the rest of their lives wondering what else I've been hiding from them. They would question every decision we've made, every conversation we've had. They would feel betrayed, but they wouldn't feel respect." Theodore was quiet for a long time. "So what do we do?" I smiled, feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in months. "We show them exactly how financially intelligent their mother really is, but we do it in a way that changes their lives forever." "What do you mean?" "Theodore, tomorrow is Christmas, and I'm about to give our children a gift they'll never forget. A lesson about the difference between financial wisdom and financial assumptions. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of bitter irony that only family dysfunction can provide. While my children exchanged gifts downstairs, laughing and celebrating what they believed would be our last Christmas in the family home, I sat in my office making the most important phone call of my professional life. "Mr. Rothschild, this is Victoria Blackwood. I'm calling to accept Pinnacle's investment offer." "Mrs. Blackwood, excellent news. I'll have our legal team prepare the investment documents immediately. When would you like to schedule the transfer?" "As soon as possible. I want to move on the BioNova opportunity while the market timing is still optimal." "Understood. Mrs. Blackwood, I want you to know that this decision places you in a very select group. Pinnacle doesn't make $50 million commitments lightly. You should be very proud of what you've accomplished." After I hung up, I could hear my family's voices drifting up from the kitchen, where Isabella was probably making her famous Christmas morning French toast while the men discussed football and politics. They had no idea that their financially stupid mother had just committed to managing an investment portfolio worth over $78 million. But my Christmas gift to them wasn't the revelation of my success. It was the opportunity to show me their true nature without any pretense or performance. I had prepared a special test, one that would reveal exactly how my children saw me, and what they were truly capable of when they thought no one was watching. Around noon, after we had exchanged presents and were settling into the comfortable Christmas afternoon routine, I made my announcement. "I have something important to tell everyone," I said, gathering my family in the living room. "Yesterday, I received some unexpected news that changes our situation significantly." Theodore knew what was coming, but he had agreed to let me handle the revelation in my own way. "What kind of news, Mom?" Marcus asked, settling into his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who expected good news delivered in manageable, comprehensible portions. "I've been contacted by a pharmaceutical company called BioNova Therapeutics. They're developing a revolutionary treatment for Alzheimer's disease, and they've offered me an opportunity to invest in their clinical trials." I watched the immediate shift in my children's expressions, from interest to concern to barely concealed alarm. "Mom," Isabella said carefully, "that sounds like the investment opportunity you mentioned yesterday, the one we discussed being too risky." "It is the same opportunity. But here's what I didn't tell you yesterday. They're not asking for our entire savings. They're asking for a much smaller amount, $25,000. And they've provided documentation that their previous investors have seen remarkable returns." This was my test. $25,000 was a significant amount, but not catastrophic if lost. It was exactly the kind of calculated risk that sophisticated investors make regularly, and it was well within our actual financial means given my hedge fund success. $25,000? Sebastian repeated. "Mom, that's still a substantial amount of money. What kind of documentation have they provided?" I pulled out a folder I had prepared, containing legitimate research reports about BioNova Therapeutics, clinical trial data, and market analysis. All information that was publicly available to anyone who knew how to research pharmaceutical investments. "The lead researcher is Dr. Amanda Richardson from Johns Hopkins," I explained. "She's published extensively on Alzheimer's treatments, and her previous research led to 2 FDA-approved drugs. The preliminary trial results show a 43% improvement in cognitive function compared to current treatments." Marcus took the folder and began examining the documents, his lawyer's training evident in how carefully he reviewed each page. "Mom, this all looks legitimate, but that doesn't mean it's a good investment." "What concerns me," Isabella added, "is how they contacted you. How did a pharmaceutical company get your information? This could be a sophisticated scam targeting seniors." There it was again. The assumption that I was a potential victim, rather than someone capable of evaluating opportunities independently. "They didn't contact me," I said. "I contacted them after researching the company and speaking with Dr. Richardson's research team directly." This statement created visible confusion among my children. The idea that their mother had independently researched a pharmaceutical company and initiated contact with medical researchers didn't fit their understanding of my capabilities. "You contacted them?" Sebastian asked. "Mom, how did you even know about this company?" "I've been following developments in Alzheimer's research for several months. Theodore's patients at the hospital often ask about new treatments, and I wanted to understand what's coming in the pipeline." This was actually true. I had been tracking several biotech companies working on neurological disorders, and BioNova was legitimately one of the most promising. "Mom, even if the research is legitimate, Pharmaceutical investments are incredibly risky, Marcus said, closing the folder. Most drugs fail in clinical trials. Even if this treatment works, it could take years to get FDA approval. But what if it succeeds? I asked. Dr. Richardson estimates that if the phase 3 trials confirm the preliminary results, the company's value could increase by 400 to 500%. Mom, that's exactly the kind of thinking that gets people into trouble, Isabella replied. You're focusing on the best-case scenario instead of the most likely outcome. So you think I should pass on this opportunity? Absolutely, all three of them said simultaneously. Even though $25,000 represents less than 3% of our total assets? Mom, 3% is still a significant amount, Sebastian said. And more importantly, this kind of speculative investment goes against everything Patricia Chen recommended. You're supposed to be reducing risk, not increasing it. But what if I have information that suggests this isn't speculative? What if I have reason to believe this investment has a high probability of success? Marcus leaned forward, his expression shifting from concern to something approaching condescension. Mom, with all due respect, what kind of information could you possibly have that professional pharmaceutical analysts don't already know? There it was. The question that revealed everything. The hyper istrad del de haued as a whole. My own son was asking me what insight I could possibly possess that professionals didn't already have. He was literally asking me to justify why my judgment might be worth considering. What if I told you that I've been studying pharmaceutical companies for 3 years? What if I told you that I've successfully predicted several breakthrough treatments before the market recognized their potential? Mom, reading articles online isn't the same as professional analysis, Isabella said gently. The pharmaceutical industry is incredibly complex. Even trained analysts get it wrong most of the time. What if I told you that my pharmaceutical investments have consistently outperformed the market over the past 3 years? Sebastian laughed. Actually laughed. Mom, if you were successfully investing in pharmaceutical companies, don't you think we would have noticed? Don't you think Dad would have mentioned it? Theodore remained silent, as we had agreed. This was my test to conduct. What if I showed you documentation proving that I've generated substantial returns from pharmaceutical investments? Mom, please stop, Marcus said, and his tone had shifted from patronizing to genuinely concerned. This is exactly how investment scams work. They create fake documentation, they tell people they have special insights, they promise extraordinary returns. You're exhibiting all the warning signs of someone who's being manipulated. So you believe I'm being scammed? I think you want to believe you have special knowledge about investments because it makes you feel more in control of our financial situation, Isabella said. But Mom, that kind of thinking is dangerous. It leads to exactly the kind of mistakes we've been trying to help you avoid. The cruelty of her statement took my breath away. My daughter was suggesting that my confidence in my own judgment was a psychological defense mechanism rather than evidence of actual competence. What if I could prove that everything I'm telling you is true? Mom, even if some of your investments have been lucky, that doesn't mean you should risk our security on pharmaceutical speculation, Sebastian said. Past performance doesn't predict future results. That's investing 101. Sebastian, my youngest child, with his brand new MBA and his entry-level consulting job, was explaining, investing 101 inches to a woman who had just accepted a $50 million institutional investment in her hedge fund. So your final recommendation is that I should not invest $25,000 in BioNova Therapeutics, even though the potential returns could significantly improve our financial security? Our final recommendation, Marcus said, speaking for all of them, is that you should stop looking for magical solutions to problems that don't actually exist. Mom, you and Dad are going to be fine financially. You don't need to take wild risks chasing unrealistic returns. And if I disagree with your assessment? The three of them exchanged glances, and I saw something in their expressions that made my blood run cold. It was the look of adult children who had decided their parent was no longer capable of making rational decisions. Mom, Isabella said carefully, if you're determined to pursue this investment despite all our advice, then maybe we need to have a different conversation about your financial decision-making. What kind of conversation? The kind of conversation about whether you should be making major financial decisions independently, Marcus said. Mom, if you're willing to risk our family's security based on pharmaceutical speculation you read about online, then maybe Dad should have power of attorney over the investment accounts. There it was, the threat I had been expecting but hoping wouldn't come. My children weren't just dismissing my judgment, they were suggesting that my disagreement with their advice was evidence that I was no longer competent to manage my own finances. You think I'm mentally incompetent? I asked quietly. We think you're making decisions based on emotion instead of logic, Sebastian said. And we think that could put both you and Dad at risk. Theodore finally spoke. Kids, I think you're overreacting. Your mother is asking us to consider a relatively small investment, not bet everything on a lottery ticket. Dad, you're not thinking clearly either, Isabella said. This is exactly why we've been worried about both of you. You're not seeing the bigger picture. The bigger picture. According to my children, the bigger picture was that their parents had become incapable of making sound financial decisions and needed to be managed like children. I stood up slowly, looking at each of my children in turn. I want to make sure I understand your position clearly. You believe that I am not qualified to evaluate a $25,000 investment opportunity, even after conducting my own research and analysis. You believe that my desire to pursue this investment indicates poor judgment that requires intervention. And you believe that if I proceed against your advice, Theodore should take control of our finances to protect me from my own decisions. Mom, you're making this sound more dramatic than it needs to be, Marcus said. We just want to make sure you're protected. Protected from what? From making mistakes you can't afford to make, Isabella replied. I nodded slowly. Thank you all for clarifying your position. Now I'd like to show you something. I walked to my office and returned with my laptop, setting it on the coffee table in front of them. I want to show you what your financially stupid mother has been doing, while you've been planning to protect her from her own poor judgment. I opened the Meridian Capital Management dashboard and turned the screen toward them. The silence that followed was the most profound I had ever experienced in our family. The numbers on the screen seemed to physically assault my children. I watched their faces transform from condescending confidence to complete bewilderment as they processed what they were seeing. Total assets under management, $78,347,521.43. Year-to-date return, 34.7%. 3-year average annual return, 28.2%. Personal investment value, $1,247,832.91. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, what is this? This is Meridian Capital Management, I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The hedge fund I've been operating for the past 3 years while you've been explaining basic financial concepts to me. Isabella leaned forward, squinting at the screen. This can't be real. Mom, this says you're managing over $78 million. $78 million and growing. As of this morning, Pinnacle Institutional Investments committed an additional $50 million to the fund. By next week, I'll be managing over $128 million in assets. Sebastian was scrolling through the performance charts, his MBA training evident in how quickly he absorbed the financial data. These returns. Mom, these returns are impossible. The S&P 500 averaged 12% over this period. You're claiming you averaged 28%? I'm not claiming anything, Sebastian. I'm showing you documented, audited results. Every transaction is recorded, every return is verified, every client statement is authentic. I clicked through several screens, showing them detailed portfolio holdings, individual stock performance, sector allocations, and risk management protocols. The data was overwhelming and indisputable. This pharmaceutical company you mentioned earlier, Marcus said slowly, BioNova Therapeutics, is already in the Meridian portfolio. I purchased shares 8 months ago when they were trading at $14. They're now at $41 following yesterday's clinical trial announcement. That position alone generated a $1.7 million profit for the fund. Theodore was sitting quietly in his chair, watching our children's faces as they struggled to process this information. He had agreed to let me handle the revelation completely, but I could see the satisfaction in his expression as he watched them realize how wrong they had been. Mom, Isabella said, her voice shaking, if this is real, if you've actually been running a hedge fund, why didn't you tell us? Because of this, I gestured around the room at our packed boxes and moving supplies. Because I knew that if I told you I was interested in investments, you would assume I was confused or being scammed. Because I knew you would try to protect me from opportunities you didn't understand. But this changes everything, Sebastian said, still staring at the screen. If you have this kind of money, this kind of success, why are we talking about selling the house? Why are we planning for you to move to Sunset Manor? Because you never asked about my financial situation, I replied. You made assumptions based on Theodore's reduced income and the market losses in his 401k. You decided I was financially naive and needed guidance. You never considered that I might have resources or knowledge you weren't aware of. Marcus stood up and began pacing, his lawyer's mind clearly working through the implications. Mom, this is incredible. But it's also incredibly risky. Hedge funds can lose money as quickly as they make it. What if you have a bad year? What if the market turns against you? Even now, even faced with 3 years of documented success, his first instinct was to question my judgment. Marcus, look at the risk metrics, I said, pointing to another section of the dashboard. Maximum drawdown over 3 years, -8%. Standard deviation, 12.4%. Sharpe ratio, 2.1. These aren't gambling results. They're the numbers of sophisticated risk management. What's a Sharpe ratio? Isabella asked. It's a measure of risk-adjusted return, Sebastian answered automatically, then stopped and stared at me. Mom, how do you know about Sharpe ratios? Because I've spent 3 years studying portfolio theory, behavioral finance, market microstructure, and quantitative analysis. Because I've read every book written by successful hedge fund managers and attended virtual conferences with institutional investors. Because this isn't a hobby, it's my profession. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Profession. I wasn't a housewife who played with stocks. I was a professional fund manager who happened to be their mother. But Mom, Isabella said, you don't have any formal training. You don't have a business degree or a finance background. How could you possibly compete with people who went to Wharton and Harvard? The same way Warren Buffett competed without an MBA in finance. The same way Peter Lynch outperformed Wall Street without a PhD in economics. The same way thousands of successful investors have generated superior returns through research, discipline, and common sense, rather than credentials. I clicked to another screen showing the fund's client list, carefully anonymized but with clear investment amounts and return histories. These are pension fund managers, university endowment directors, and family office principals who have entrusted me with their money specifically because my results speak for themselves. They don't care about my educational background. They care about my track record. Theodore finally spoke up. Kids, your mother has been generating more income from her fund than my medical practice ever did. The money she's made in the past 3 years exceeds my entire career earnings. This statement seemed to break something in my children's understanding of reality. They had spent their entire lives seeing Theodore as the financial provider and me as the supported spouse. The idea that I had not only achieved financial independence, but had surpassed their father's lifetime earnings was almost incomprehensible. Why didn't you tell Dad? Marcus asked. How could you keep this secret from your own husband? Because I wanted to prove it worked before I had to defend it, I said. Because I knew that if I told Theodore the first was starting a hedge fund, he would worry about the risks and want me to stop before I could demonstrate success. Because I wanted to be taken seriously based on my results, not tolerated based on my relationship. But you lied to us, Isabella said, and I could hear accusation creeping into her voice. For 3 years, you let us believe you needed our financial guidance while you were secretly outperforming Wall Street. I didn't lie about anything. I never claimed to be financially incompetent. You assumed I was financially incompetent and created an entire intervention based on your assumptions. Sebastian was still studying the portfolio data. Mom, these holdings, this isn't random stock picking. This is sophisticated sector rotation, momentum trading, value investing. This is professional level analysis. Thank you for noticing. But if you can do this, Marcus said, if you've been this successful, why did you let us plan the move to Sunset Manor? Why didn't you just tell us you could afford to keep the house? Because I wanted to see what you would do when you thought I needed help. I wanted to know whether you saw me as a capable adult who might have solutions you hadn't considered, or as a burden who needed to be managed. The silence that followed was deafening. And what did you conclude? Isabella asked quietly. That you see me as someone who needs to be protected from her own poor judgment. That you believe I'm incapable of making rational financial decisions. That you think my confidence in my own abilities is a dangerous delusion that requires intervention. Mom, that's not fair, Sebastian protested. We were trying to help. By threatening to have Theodore take power of attorney over my finances? By suggesting that my interest in pharmaceutical investments was evidence of mental incompetence? By planning to move me to a senior community so I wouldn't have to worry about managing complex decisions? I stood up and closed the laptop. Sebastian, 40 minutes ago you laughed at the idea that I might have insights about pharmaceutical companies. You literally laughed at your mother's suggestion that she might understand something you didn't. That was before we knew about this. He gestured vaguely at the laptop. Exactly. Your respect for my intelligence is conditional on whether I can prove I deserve it. Your willingness to consider my judgment depends on whether I can demonstrate credentials you approve of. Marcus was still pacing, clearly struggling with the implications of what he had learned. Mom, this is going to take some time to process. This changes everything we thought we knew about. Everything. No, Marcus, it doesn't change anything. I'm the same person I was this morning. I have the same intelligence, the same judgment, the same capabilities. The only thing that's changed is your knowledge of what I've been doing with those capabilities. But why reveal this now? Isabella asked. Why not just tell us you didn't want to move and leave it at that? Because tomorrow, Financial Weekly magazine is publishing a feature article about emerging hedge fund managers in New England. Meridian Capital Management is their lead story. By next week, everyone in Connecticut's financial community will know that Victoria Blackwood is one of the state's most successful fund managers.
I paused, letting this sink in. Which means that within days, everyone we know will be reading about how your financially stupid mother has been outperforming Wall Street while you were planning to put her in a retirement home because you thought she couldn't manage her own finances. The implications hit them simultaneously. Their friends, colleagues, and professional networks would all learn that they had been trying to institutionalize one of Connecticut's most successful investors. So you have a choice to make, I continued. You can continue believing that your mother needs protection from her own poor judgment, or you can start treating me like the competent professional I've proven myself to be. What does that mean practically? Marcus asked. I smiled for the first time that day. It means we're not moving to Sunset Manor. It means Patricia Chen's services are no longer needed. It means you stop making financial decisions for me and start asking if there's anything you can learn from my experience. And if we can't accept that, Sebastian asked, then you'll learn that underestimating people can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make, personally and professionally. The room fell silent as my children contemplated a future where their mother was not someone who needed their guidance, but someone whose success made their own accomplishments look modest by comparison. The power dynamic in our family had just shifted permanently, and we all knew it. The week following Christmas was unlike any I had ever experienced in my 36 years of marriage. Our house, which had been filled with boxes and the melancholy energy of an ending, suddenly buzzed with the excitement of new beginnings. The first order of business was canceling everything my children had arranged. Theodore and I spent Monday morning on a series of phone calls that felt like reclaiming our lives. Mrs. Pemberton, this is Victoria Blackwood. I'm calling to cancel our reservation at Sunset Manor and arrange for the return of our deposit. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm so sorry to hear this. Was there something about the facility that didn't meet your expectations? On the contrary, Sunset Manor is lovely. It's just that our financial situation has improved dramatically, and we've decided to remain in our home. The conversation with Brenda Martinez, the real estate agent, was even more satisfying. Brenda, we won't be listing the house after all. Our circumstances have changed significantly. Mrs. Blackwood, I understand that selling a family home can be emotional, but the market conditions really are optimal right now. Are you sure you want to miss this opportunity? I'm certain. In fact, I'm considering some renovations instead. Perhaps you could recommend a good contractor? But the most liberating call was to Patricia Chen. Patricia, this is Victoria Blackwood. We've decided not to move forward with your investment management services. Mrs. Blackwood, I hope this isn't because of the portfolio recommendations we discussed. I'd be happy to adjust the allocation to address any concerns you might have. Actually, Patricia, I've decided to manage our investments personally, but thank you for your time. The silence on the other end was telling. The idea that a retirement-age housewife would choose to manage her own investments rather than accept professional guidance clearly didn't compute. While Theodore and I were busy undoing my children's plans, something unexpected was happening in my professional life. Word of Pinnacle's investment had spread through Connecticut's financial community faster than I had anticipated. Tuesday morning brought a call from James Wellington, managing partner at Hartford Financial Group, one of the most prestigious wealth management firms in the state. Mrs. Blackwood, I'll be direct. We've heard about Pinnacle's investment in Meridian Capital Management, and we're very interested in discussing how Hartford Financial might partner with your fund. What kind of partnership did you have in mind, Mr. Wellington? We have several high-net-worth clients who are specifically looking for alternative investments with proven track records. Your returns have been remarkable. We'd like to explore offering Meridian Capital as an option within our platform.
This was extraordinary. Hartford Financial managed over $2 billion in client assets. Their endorsement would establish me as a legitimate player in Connecticut's institutional investment community. I'd be interested in discussing that, I replied, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. Excellent. Would Thursday at 2 p.m. work for you? I'd like to bring our Chief Investment Officer and our Alternative Investments team leader. After I hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the winter garden I had been preparing to abandon just days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my children had been planning to simplify my life by eliminating complex decisions, my professional life was becoming more sophisticated than ever. Wednesday brought another surprise. A visit from my children that I hadn't expected. All three of them arrived together, looking subdued and uncertain in a way I had never seen before. Gone was the confident authority they had displayed just days earlier when they were managing my life. In its place was something that looked almost like humility. "Mom," Marcus began, "we've been talking, and we owe you an apology." They settled into our living room, the same room where they had presented their PowerPoint about why I needed to move to a senior community, and I could see they had prepared remarks. "We realize now that we made assumptions about your capabilities that were unfair and frankly insulting," Isabella continued. "We treated you like you were incompetent when you were actually more successful than any of us. We were trying to help," Sebastian added, "but we see now that our help was based on the belief that you couldn't take care of yourself. That was wrong." I listened carefully, watching their faces for signs of genuine understanding versus mere damage control. "What changed your minds?" I asked. Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Honestly, several things. First, we spent the past few days researching hedge fund management. What you've accomplished isn't just impressive, it's extraordinary. The risk-adjusted returns you've generated would be remarkable for someone with decades of Wall Street experience. Second," Isabella added, "we realized that our advice would have been financially disastrous. If you had followed our recommendations, you would have liquidated successful investments, reduced your income, and moved into a more expensive living situation. We would have made you poorer while thinking we were helping you." Sebastian pulled out his phone and showed me an article. But mostly, we saw this. It was the Financial Weekly piece, published online ahead of the print edition. The headline read, "The Suburban Hedge Fund Manager Who's Beating Wall Street." My photograph appeared below the title, along with a detailed analysis of Meridian Capital Management's performance. "Mom, this article describes you as one of New England's most promising investment managers, and compares your results to legendary fund managers like Peter Lynch and Warren Buffett. It mentions that Pinnacle Institutional has made a significant investment, and that other institutions are taking notice." I took Sebastian's phone and read the article. It was even more favorable than I had expected, describing my background as unconventional but remarkably effective, and noting that my success challenged traditional assumptions about who could succeed in professional investment management. "Our friends are going to read this," Marcus said quietly. "Our colleagues, our professional networks. Everyone is going to know that while you were building this incredible success, we were trying to put you in a retirement home." "Are you embarrassed?" I asked. "We're embarrassed by our behavior," Isabella replied. "We're proud of your success, but we're ashamed of how we treated you." This was more than I had expected. I had hoped for acknowledgement, but they were offering genuine contrition. "What do you want from me now?" I asked. "We want to understand," Marcus said. "We want to learn from what you've done. And we want to figure out how to rebuild a relationship that's based on respect instead of condescension. We also want to help," Sebastian added. "I know we don't have your expertise, but if there are ways we can support your fund or your business, we'd like to contribute." This offer surprised me. "What kind of support?" "Legal services," Marcus said immediately. "Fund management involves complex regulations, client agreements, compliance issues. I could handle that work for Meridian Capital." "Marketing and client relations," Isabella offered. "My experience in pharmaceutical marketing could translate to investment marketing. I understand how to communicate complex concepts to sophisticated audiences." "Operations and analysis," Sebastian concluded. "My MBA training and consulting experience could be useful for operational improvements, performance analysis, or client reporting." I looked at my 3 children, who just days earlier had been planning to manage my finances because they thought I was incompetent. now offering to work for the fund they hadn't known existed. "You want to work for me?" I asked. "We want to work with you," Marcus clarified, "as professionals who respect your expertise and leadership." "What about your current jobs?" "We've been talking about that," Isabella said. "Marcus is already planning to start his own practice. I'm eligible for early partnership at my company, which would give me more flexibility. Sebastian's consulting contract ends in 6 months. You've been planning career changes based on 4 days of knowing about my fund?" "We've been planning career changes based on realizing that our mother is more successful than we are and that we've been idiots," Sebastian said with a self-deprecating smile. I walked to the window and looked out at our neighborhood, where several houses had for sale signs and moving trucks, evidence of other families making transitions they believed were necessary for their future security. "If you work with Meridian Capital," I said finally, "it won't be because you're my children. It will be because you can contribute to the fund's success. I won't hire you out of guilt or family obligation." "We understand," Marcus said. "We want to earn our positions based on what we can contribute." "And you understand that I would be your boss? That the decisions about strategy, investments, and operations would be mine to make?" "We understand," they said in unison. I turned back to face them. "Then let's start with this week's challenge." Thursday, I'm meeting with Hartford Financial Group about a potential partnership that could increase our assets under management to over $300 million. I need a legal analysis of partnership structures, a marketing presentation about our competitive advantages, and an operational assessment of scaling requirements. The change in their expressions was immediate and dramatic. Instead of the patronizing concern they had shown when they thought they were helping their confused mother, I saw the focused attention of professionals who had just been given meaningful work by someone they respected. "When do you need these deliverables?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow morning. The meeting is at 2 p.m. "Consider it done," Isabella said. As my children left to begin working on their assignments, Theodore joined me in the living room. "You know they're going to be excellent," he said. "They're smart, they're motivated, and now they understand what they're working toward." "They're going to have to prove themselves," I replied. "But yes, I think they could be very valuable to the fund." "And how does it feel, having them ask to work for you instead of trying to manage your life?" I smiled, feeling a satisfaction deeper than any investment return I had ever generated. "It feels like I finally have the family I always wanted. One based on mutual respect, instead of assumptions." "What about me?" Theodore asked. "Do I get to be part of this new family business?" "Theodore, you've been part of this success from the beginning. You just didn't know it. Every conversation about your patients, every discussion about medical breakthroughs, every insight you shared about healthcare trends, it all contributed to my investment research." "So I was an unwitting research consultant?" "You were my secret weapon. And now that the secret's out, you can be my official medical sector advisor." Theodore laughed, the first genuinely joyful sound our house had heard in months. "From retirement to family business advisor. I have to admit, it beats playing golf every day." That evening, as I sat in my office reviewing the day's market activity, I realized that Christmas had brought me something more valuable than vindication or financial success. It had brought me the opportunity to build real relationships with my children, relationships based on who we actually were rather than who we had assumed each other to be. The woman they had seen as financially naive was gone forever. But more importantly, the children I had seen as disrespectful and controlling were transforming into colleagues and partners. Our family was about to become something none of us had ever imagined, a team of equals working toward shared success. The transformation in my children's attitudes was remarkable, but it was nothing compared to what happened when the wider world discovered who I really was. The Financial Weekly article hit newsstands on Thursday morning, the same day as my meeting with Hartford Financial Group. By 10 a.m., my phone was ringing constantly with calls from investment professionals, journalists, and potential clients who had read about Meridian Capital Management. But the most telling reactions came from people in my personal life who suddenly realized they had been completely wrong about me. The first call came from Patricia Chen herself. "Mrs. Blackwood, I just read the Financial Weekly article." Her voice was carefully controlled, professional, but I could hear the underlying shock. "I had no idea about your background in investment management when we met." "That's because you didn't ask about my background, Patricia. You assumed I needed basic education about asset allocation and risk management." There was a long pause. "Mrs. Blackwood, I want to apologize if our previous conversation seemed presumptuous. I was operating under incomplete information. You were operating under the assumption that a retirement-age woman without formal finance credentials couldn't possibly understand sophisticated investment strategies. Yes, I suppose I was. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm calling to see if you might consider a partnership arrangement. Hartford Wealth Management has been looking for alternative investment opportunities for our high-net-worth clients, and your track record is exactly what we've been seeking. The irony was delicious. Patricia Chen, who 2 weeks earlier had been explaining basic portfolio theory to me like I was a child learning to count, was now asking to partner with my fund. Patricia, I appreciate the interest, but I'm already in discussions with Hartford Financial Group about a platform partnership. Their proposal is quite comprehensive. Of course. Mrs. Blackwood, I hope you'll keep us in mind for future opportunities. Your success is truly inspiring. After I hung up, I couldn't help but smile. Patricia's tone had shifted from condescending patience to professional deference in the span of a single magazine article. The second call was even more satisfying. Mrs. Blackwood, this is Jennifer Walsh from Organized Transitions. I'm calling about the downsizing project we discussed for your home. I had completely forgotten about the woman Isabella had brought to inventory my possessions for the estate sale. Yes, Jennifer, what can I do for you? Well, I just wanted to follow up on our timeline. Your daughter mentioned that you were planning to complete the transition by February, but I haven't received the final inventory list or scheduling preferences. Jennifer, we won't be needing your services after all. We've decided not to downsize. Oh, well, that's certainly your prerogative. May I ask what changed? Often families go through periods of uncertainty about these transitions, but I find that once they commit to the process, they're much happier afterward. What changed is that our financial situation improved dramatically. We no longer need to reduce our living expenses. I see. Mrs. Blackwood, if you don't mind me asking, how did your financial situation improve so quickly? Did you receive an inheritance or settlement of some kind? The question revealed everything about Jennifer's assumptions. The idea that a woman my age could improve her financial situation through her own professional success simply hadn't occurred to her. I didn't receive anything, Jennifer. I earned it through my hedge fund management business. The silence on the other end stretched for so long that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. Your hedge fund? Meridian Capital Management. Perhaps you saw the article in Financial Weekly this morning? No, I don't typically read Financial Weekly. Mrs. Blackwood, are you saying that you manage a hedge fund? I'm saying that I've been managing a successful hedge fund for 3 years while my family was planning to move me to a senior community because they thought I couldn't handle complex financial decisions. Another long silence. Mrs. Blackwood, I owe you an apology. I clearly misunderstood your situation completely. You understood the situation you were presented with, Jennifer. The problem is that the situation you were presented with was based on assumptions rather than facts. But the most dramatic reaction came that afternoon during my meeting with Hartford Financial Group. I had asked Marcus, Isabella, and Sebastian to join me, both to present their analysis and to observe how professional investment discussions actually worked. The Hartford financial offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Hartford, with conference rooms that overlooked the Connecticut River. James Wellington led a team of 6 professionals, including their chief investment officer, alternative investments director, compliance officer, legal counsel, and 2 senior portfolio managers. Mrs. Blackwood, Wellington began, we've reviewed Meridian Capital's track record extensively, and frankly, we're impressed. Your risk-adjusted returns are exceptional, and your investment philosophy aligns perfectly with what our clients are seeking. I had prepared a presentation about the fund's strategies, but I could see that my children were more nervous than I was. This was their first glimpse into the professional world I had been operating in while they thought I was clipping coupons and playing bridge. Our proposal is straightforward, Wellington continued. We'd like to offer Meridian Capital as a premium alternative investment option to our qualified clients. We estimate initial capital commitments of approximately $200 million, with potential growth to $500 million over 18 months. $500 million. My children's faces reflected shock at the numbers being discussed. Just weeks ago, they had been worried about our ability to maintain a mortgage on an $850,000 house. What would be the structure of this arrangement? I asked. We would function as the distribution platform while you maintain complete investment discretion. Our clients would invest directly in Meridian Capital, and we would receive a distribution fee while you retain your management fees. Marcus leaned forward. What about regulatory compliance and operational oversight? Hartford's legal counsel, a woman named Sarah Chen, no relation to Patricia, responded immediately. We've reviewed Meridian Capital's regulatory filings and operational procedures. Everything is properly structured. Mrs. Blackwood has been remarkably thorough in her compliance protocols. Isabella asked about marketing and client communication strategies, demonstrating her pharmaceutical industry expertise in a way that clearly impressed the Hartford team. Sebastian's questions about operational scaling and performance reporting showed a sophisticated understanding of fund management that surprised even me. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, Hartford Financial Group wasn't just interested in partnering with my fund. They were impressed with my entire team. Mrs. Blackwood, Wellington said as we prepared to leave, I have to ask, where did you find such exceptional support staff? Your legal, marketing, and operations advisors are remarkably well prepared. They're my children, I replied simply. The expressions around the conference table were priceless. Here was a woman they were treating as a peer in the investment management world, whose staff consisted of her own family members. Your children work for your fund? Sarah Chen asked. They work with my fund, I corrected. Each of them brings professional expertise that enhances our capabilities. After we left the Hartford offices, my children and I went to dinner at a restaurant downtown. The contrast with our last family meal together was striking. Instead of them explaining financial concepts to me, I was explaining institutional investment dynamics to them. Mom, Marcus said over dinner, watching you in that meeting was incredible. You weren't just holding your own with those professionals. You were leading the conversation. That's what being a fund manager means, Marcus. Client meetings, strategy discussions, regulatory compliance, performance analysis. It's not glamorous, but it's sophisticated work. I had no idea, Isabella admitted. When I thought about what you did all day, I pictured you watching television or working in the garden. I never imagined you were analyzing market trends and managing institutional relationships. What you imagined was what you expected to see, I replied. And what you expected to see was based on assumptions about what women my age were capable of. Sebastian was unusually quiet during dinner, and finally he spoke up. Mom, I keep thinking about the pharmaceutical investment test you gave us on Christmas. We told you that $25,000 was too risky, that you didn't understand the complexity of drug development, that you should stick to conservative investments. What about it? Today, Hartford Financial Group offered you access to $200 million specifically to pursue exactly those kinds of opportunities. The investment strategy we told you was too sophisticated for you to understand is the reason institutional investors want to work with you. What's your point, Sebastian? My point is that if you had listened to our advice, you would have missed opportunities worth millions of dollars. Our help would have cost you more money than most people earn in their entire careers. This realization seemed to hit all three of them simultaneously. Their financial guidance hadn't just been condescending. It had been financially destructive. But you didn't listen to our advice, Marcus pointed out. You made your own decisions based on your own analysis. How did you know to ignore us? Because I had confidence in my own judgment, I replied. Because I had spent 3 years proving to myself that I could evaluate opportunities and manage risks effectively. Because I knew that my track record spoke louder than your assumptions. The waiter brought our check, and without thinking, I reached for it. But Marcus intercepted my hand. Mom, let me get this. Marcus, I just signed a partnership agreement that could generate millions in management fees. I think I can afford dinner. He smiled, but he still looked slightly overwhelmed. I know you can afford it. I'm still adjusting to the fact that you're probably wealthier than all of us combined. As we walked back to our cars, Isabella asked the question I had been expecting. Mom, what happens now? How do we go back to normal family relationships after everything that's happened? We don't go back, Isabella. We go forward. We build new relationships based on who we actually are rather than who we assumed each other to be. And who are we? Sebastian asked. I looked at my 3 children, accomplished professionals who had learned a hard lesson about assumptions and respect, and at Theodore, who was smiling with pride at the family we were becoming. We're a team, I said, and we're about to find out just how successful we can be when we stop underestimating each other. That night, as I reviewed the Hartford Financial Partnership documents, I realized that the tables hadn't just turned, they had been completely rebuilt. My children were no longer trying to manage my life. They were asking to join it. The professionals who had dismissed my capabilities were seeking my partnership. The future that had looked like downsizing and simplification had become expansion and opportunity. But most importantly, I was no longer Victoria Blackwood, the housewife who needed protection from complex decisions. I was Victoria Blackwood, the fund manager whose success had forced everyone around her to reconsider what they thought they knew about capability, intelligence, and respect. 6 weeks later, The consequences of my revelation were reverberating through our community in ways I hadn't anticipated. The Financial Weekly article had been picked up by other publications, and suddenly everyone in Maplewood Heights knew that the woman they had seen as a typical suburban housewife was actually one of Connecticut's most successful hedge fund managers. The moment that crystallized everything happened at the annual Maplewood Heights Community Association meeting in early February. It was an event I had attended faithfully for 15 years, usually sitting quietly while others made presentations about neighborhood issues, fundraising goals, and community improvements. This year was different. I arrived at the meeting to find the community center buzzing with an energy I had never experienced before. People who had barely acknowledged me in previous years were suddenly eager to engage in conversation. "Victoria, I had no idea about your business success," said Margaret Thornfield, the association president who had previously treated me like a well-meaning but inconsequential volunteer. The article in Financial Weekly was absolutely fascinating. "Thank you, Margaret. I've been managing investments for several years now." "Several years? Victoria, how did none of us know about this? You've been coming to these meetings, working on the library fundraiser, participating in the garden club like a regular resident. Like a regular resident. As if successful business ownership was incompatible with community involvement. I am a regular resident, Margaret. I just happen to work in investment management rather than traditional employment." But the real confrontation began when Patricia Chen arrived at the meeting. She had apparently joined the community association recently, no doubt as part of her effort to network with potential clients in affluent neighborhoods. "Victoria," Patricia approached me during the social hour before the meeting began. "I'm so glad to see you here. I've been hoping we might have a chance to continue our conversation about potential collaboration." The conversation that followed unfolded in front of at least a dozen community members, many of whom had known me for years and were clearly fascinated by this interaction between the local financial advisor and their newly famous neighbor. "Patricia, as I mentioned on the phone, I'm already committed to the Hartford Financial Partnership. Our client capacity is fully allocated for the foreseeable future." "Of course I understand. But, Victoria, I've been thinking about our previous conversations, and I realize I may have given you the wrong impression about my assessment of your capabilities." This was remarkable. Patricia Chen was essentially admitting in public that she had misjudged me, but she was doing it in a way that tried to minimize her error while positioning herself for future opportunities. "What kind of wrong impression?" I asked, genuinely curious to see how she would handle this. "Well, when we met in December, I was focused on providing comprehensive financial planning services. I wasn't aware that you already had extensive investment experience and were managing assets professionally." Margaret Thornfield was listening to this conversation with obvious fascination, along with several other community members who were pretending to discuss other topics while clearly eavesdropping. "Patricia, you recommended that I liquidate my existing investments and implement a conservative portfolio generating 6 to 8% annual returns. Were you aware that my actual investments were generating over 30% annual returns?" The community center had grown noticeably quieter as more people tuned into our conversation. "I was working with the information I had at the time," Patricia replied carefully. "Your family was concerned about risk management and income stability, given your husband's health situation. My family was concerned because they assumed I was financially incompetent. You reinforced that assumption by explaining basic financial concepts to me without asking about my existing knowledge or experience." Patricia's professional composure was beginning to crack. "Victoria, I think there may have been some miscommunication about the scope of our consultation." "There was no miscommunication, Patricia. You assumed that a retirement-age woman whose husband had health issues must need basic financial education. You recommended strategies that would have reduced my income by approximately $2 million annually. The number hit the room like a physical force. $2 million annually. People who had seen me volunteering at the library book sale were now learning that the financial advice I had rejected would have cost me more money than most of them would earn in their entire careers." "Mrs. Blackwood," interrupted a voice from across the room. It was Dr. Richard Hayes, a cardiologist who worked with Theodore and one of the most respected residents in our community. "Are you saying that your investment returns exceed $2 million per year?" "I'm saying that the portfolio strategy Patricia recommended would have reduced my annual income by approximately $2 million compared to what I actually earned through my fund management activities." Dr. Hayes looked from me to Patricia and back again. "Patricia, you recommended that Victoria reduce her investment returns by $2 million annually?" Patricia's face had gone pale. Dr. Hayes, I was providing standard retirement planning guidance based on the information available to me at the time. What information was available to you? Dr. Hayes pressed. Did you analyze Victoria's existing investment performance before recommending changes? The family was concerned about risk management and wanted to implement a more conservative approach. The family was concerned, I clarified, because they thought I was financially naive. Patricia never asked about my investment experience, never reviewed my existing performance, never inquired about my professional background. She assumed I needed basic education about asset allocation. Margaret Thornfield finally spoke up. Victoria, I have to ask, if you were generating these kinds of returns, why didn't you mention it during our fundraising discussions? The library renovation project has been struggling to reach our goal, and here you've been sitting in our meetings with the resources to fund it entirely. This was the question I had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Margaret, how much does the library renovation cost? Our goal is $450,000. We've been fundraising for 2 years, and we're still $180,000 short. I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a check for $200,000, handing it to Margaret in front of the entire room. Consider the library renovation fully funded, I said simply. The silence that followed was profound. Margaret stared at the check. Dr. Hayes looked stunned, and Patricia Chen appeared to be reconsidering her entire approach to client assessment. Victoria, Margaret whispered, this is incredibly generous. But why now? Why didn't you contribute earlier? Because earlier nobody asked me. For 2 years, this community has been organizing bake sales, car washes, and silent auctions to raise money for a project I could have funded with a single month's earnings. But nobody ever suggested that the woman who volunteered to organize the book sale might have the resources to support larger initiatives. Dr. Hayes was studying me with new interest. Victoria, what other assumptions have we been making about our neighbors' capabilities? How many people in this room have resources or expertise that we've never bothered to discover? It was a profound question that seemed to ripple through the room. People began looking at each other differently, wondering what hidden depths their neighbors might possess. But I wasn't finished with Patricia. Patricia, you've built a business based on helping people manage their finances. When you met with me and Theodore, what questions did you ask to assess our existing financial sophistication? We discussed your risk tolerance, your income needs, your time horizon for investment. Did you ask about my education, my professional experience, my existing investment knowledge? Not specifically, no. Did you ask to review my existing investment performance before recommending changes? The focus was on developing a comprehensive plan going forward. The focus was on assuming that I needed guidance, rather than determining whether I actually needed guidance. You treated me like a potential client who required education rather than a potential peer who might have insights to share. Dr. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. Patricia, this raises serious questions about your assessment methodology. If you can't accurately evaluate a client's existing capabilities, how can you provide appropriate recommendations? Patricia was clearly struggling with the public nature of this conversation. Dr. Hayes, client consultations are typically confidential discussions. I'm not comfortable analyzing my professional practices in this setting. Then let me make this easier, I said. Patricia, based on your experience with me, would you recommend that financial advisors make assumptions about clients' capabilities based on their age, gender, or apparent lifestyle? Of course not. Every client should be assessed individually. And yet you explained basic portfolio theory to someone who is already managing a hedge fund. You recommended conservative strategies to someone who is generating institutional quality returns. You treated investment decisions as too complex for someone who was already outperforming most professional managers. The community center had become completely silent. Everyone was listening to this real-time deconstruction of professional assumptions and their consequences. Victoria, Margaret said finally, what you're describing isn't just about financial planning. It's about how we see each other, how we make assumptions about what people are capable of. Exactly. For 3 years, I managed millions of dollars in investments, while my own children planned to move me to a senior community because they thought I couldn't handle complex decisions. For years, this community organized fundraisers for projects I could have funded easily, but nobody imagined that the woman organizing bake sales might have the resources to write substantial checks. I looked around the room at faces I had known for years, people who were now seeing me completely differently. The question isn't why I didn't reveal my capabilities earlier. The question is why nobody ever bothered to discover what those capabilities might be. As the formal meeting began, I realized that this confrontation had accomplished something more important than vindicating my professional success. It had forced an entire community to confront their assumptions about hidden potential, unrecognized expertise, and the danger of underestimating people based on appearances. The real victory wasn't proving that I was more successful than anyone had imagined. It was demonstrating that assumptions about capability could be not just wrong but catastrophically expensive, financially, professionally, and personally. And as I sat in that community center, surrounded by neighbors who were suddenly seeing me as someone they had never bothered to truly know, I realized that my story was about more than just investment returns or family dynamics. It was about the cost of not recognizing the people who are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the right questions and discover who they really are. 1 year later, I stood in the conference room of our new offices overlooking Hartford Harbor, watching my son Marcus present our quarterly compliance report to a room full of institutional investors. The transformation of our family and our lives had exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Meridian Capital Management now occupied an entire floor of the Riverfront Financial Center, with 12 employees and over $400 million in assets under management. What had started as my secret hedge fund had become one of the most respected investment firms in New England, and my children had become integral to its success in ways I never could have imagined. Marcus had left his law firm 6 months earlier to become our general counsel and chief operating officer. His legal expertise had proven invaluable as we navigated the complex regulatory requirements of managing institutional money, and his natural leadership abilities had made him an excellent operations manager. Isabella had taken a leave of absence from her pharmaceutical company to become our director of client relations and strategic marketing. Her experience in healthcare marketing had translated perfectly to investment marketing, and her ability to communicate complex concepts to sophisticated audiences had been crucial to our client growth. Sebastian had finished his consulting contract and joined us as director of research and analytics. His MBA training and consulting background had given him exactly the skills needed to build the operational infrastructure required for our expanded scale. But more than their professional contributions, what amazed me most was how naturally they had adapted to working in a business where their mother was the recognized expert and ultimate authority. The children who had once tried to manage my finances were now proud to introduce me to potential clients as, quote, one of the most successful fund managers in Connecticut. Theodore had also found his role in our new world. His medical expertise had proved invaluable for our healthcare investments, and he had become our unofficial medical sector advisor. Several of our most successful positions had originated from his insights about promising treatments and breakthrough technologies. The community response to our success had been equally remarkable. The Maplewood Heights Community Association had elected me as their new treasurer, and I had helped establish an investment fund that was generating income to support various community projects. The library renovation I had funded had become a model for how successful residents could contribute to community development. But perhaps the most satisfying change was in the attitude of people who had previously dismissed my capabilities. Patricia Chen had actually approached me at a recent financial industry conference to ask if I would consider speaking at a seminar about recognizing hidden expertise in unexpected places. The irony of being asked to teach financial advisors how to avoid the mistakes Patricia had made with me was not lost on either of us. The Hartford Financial Partnership had exceeded all expectations. Our returns had remained consistently strong, and word of our success had spread throughout the institutional investment community. We now had a waiting list of potential clients and had become selective about which investment opportunities we pursued. This morning's investor meeting was particularly significant because it included representatives from the Connecticut Teachers' Retirement System, Yale University's endowment, and 3 major pension funds. These were the kinds of clients that most hedge funds spent years trying to attract, and they were seeking us out based on our track record and reputation. The risk-adjusted returns speak for themselves. Marcus was explaining to the group. Over 4 years of operation, Meridian Capital has generated consistent alpha while maintaining downside protection that exceeds industry standards. I watched the investors nodding approvingly as they reviewed our performance data. These were sophisticated professionals who understood exactly what our numbers represented, and they were impressed. Mrs. Blackwood, said Dr. Patricia Williams from the Yale Endowment, I have to ask about your background. Your track record is remarkable, but your path to fund management is quite unconventional. How did you develop the expertise that's generated these results? It was a question I had been asked many times over the past year, and I had learned to answer it in a way that addressed the real issue behind the curiosity. Dr. Williams, I think my unconventional background is actually an advantage. I didn't come to investment management with preconceived notions about what was possible or impossible. I approached it as an intellectual challenge that required research, analysis, and disciplined thinking, skills that aren't exclusive to people with traditional finance credentials. But the sophistication of your strategies, pressed Michael Chen from the teacher's retirement system, suggests years of professional development. How did you acquire that level of expertise independently? The same way anyone acquires expertise in any field, through study, practice, and learning from mistakes. I read every book, attended every webinar, analyzed every successful investor's methodology I could find. I started small, tested my theories, refined my approach based on results. Sebastian stepped forward with supporting data. What our research shows is that Mom's success isn't accidental. Her investment philosophy is based on rigorous fundamental analysis combined with sophisticated risk management. The results are repeatable because the methodology is sound. Isabella added, from a client service perspective, what sets Meridian Capital apart is our commitment to transparency and education. We don't just manage money, we help our clients understand our investment thesis and decision-making process. After the investors left, expressing strong interest in increasing their allocations to our fund, my family and I gathered in my office to reflect on how far we had come. Mom, Marcus said, settling into one of the chairs around my conference table. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had listened to our advice last Christmas? You mean if I had sold the house, moved to Sunset Manor, and turned our finances over to Patricia Chen? Exactly. We would have destroyed everything you had built. Theodore joined the conversation from the chair beside my desk. More than that, we would have prevented everything you were about to build. The Hartford partnership, the institutional clients, this entire firm, none of it would have existed.
The cost would have been enormous, Isabella agreed. Not just financially, but professionally and personally. Mom, you would have gone from being a successful entrepreneur to being a managed retiree. Sebastian was looking out the window at Hartford Harbor, where boats were moving through the late afternoon sunlight. I keep thinking about the assumptions we made. We saw an older woman whose husband had health issues, and we immediately concluded she needed protection and guidance. You saw what you expected to see, I replied. And what you expected to see was based on stereotypes about age, gender, and capability. But you knew better, Marcus said. You knew you were capable of more than we imagined. How did you maintain confidence in your own judgment when everyone around you was questioning it? It was a profound question that went to the heart of everything that had happened. Because I had proof, I said finally. For 3 years I had been testing my judgment against the market and consistently winning. I had generated returns that spoke louder than anyone's assumptions about what I should or shouldn't be able to do. But it must have been tempting to take the easy path, Theodore said. To accept our assessment and let us manage your life. It would have been easier in the short term, I agreed. But it would have been devastating in the long term. Not just financially, but personally. I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what I might have accomplished if I had trusted my own capabilities. Isabella walked over to the wall where we had hung the framed Financial Weekly article that had started everything. Mom, this article changed how everyone sees you. But you were the same person before it was published. The only thing that changed was other people's knowledge of who you really were. That's the lesson in all of this, I said. People are walking around with hidden depths, untapped potential, unrecognized expertise, but we'll never discover it if we make assumptions based on appearances or stereotypes. As my family prepared to leave for the day, I remained in my office, looking out at the city where I had transformed from a dismissed housewife to a respected fund manager. The view from my office window showed the harbor where ships came and went, carrying cargo to destinations around the world, a perfect metaphor for the journeys that were possible when people were free to pursue their full potential. My phone buzzed with a text message from my assistant. Tomorrow's Wall Street Journal interview confirmed for 10 a.m. They want to discuss your upcoming book about recognizing investment opportunities in unexpected places. The book had been Sebastian's idea, a way to share the lessons we had learned about challenging assumptions and discovering hidden potential. The working title was The Hidden Fund Manager: How Stereotypes Cost Billions and Why Looking Deeper Pays Dividends. As I packed up my briefcase and prepared to head home to the house we had chosen not to sell, I reflected on the most important lesson from our family's transformation. The greatest investment anyone can make is in recognizing and developing human potential, especially in places where others aren't looking.
My children had learned that their financially stupid mother was actually more successful than they had ever imagined. My community had learned that their quiet neighbor was capable of funding projects they had struggled to finance for years. The financial industry had learned that expertise could emerge from the most unexpected backgrounds. But the lesson that mattered most to me was personal. That trusting your own judgment, even when everyone else questions it, can be the difference between living the life others expect and creating the life you're actually capable of achieving. As I drove home through Maplewood Heights, past the library I had funded and the community center where I had confronted years of assumptions, I smiled at the thought of how many other financially stupid mothers might be sitting in their home offices right now, quietly building something extraordinary, while the world around them remains completely unaware of who they really are. The only question is, when will someone finally ask them the right questions and discover what they're truly capable of? Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.